Night had fallen relentlessly over St. Grace Hospital. In room 304, 8-year-old Ethan Parker lay motionless, his small body weakened by a battle he could no longer fight. The heart monitor beeped intermittently, each sound growing weaker, each moment stretching unbearably long. His parents, Sarah and Michael, sat beside his bed, their fingers intertwined as if holding onto each other could somehow hold their son here, tether him to life. Tears streaked their faces, silent testaments to their grief. Beside Ethan, his golden retriever, Charlie, refused to leave his side. The dog lay at the edge of the bed, his muzzle gently resting on Ethan's frail hand. He had always been Ethan's protector, his constant companion through laughter and illness alike. Tonight, however, Charlie was more than a friend. He was a silent warrior, as if standing guard against an invisible force trying to pull Ethan away. Hours earlier, Dr. Richard Coleman had entered the room, his face heavy with sorrow. He had spoken the words Sarah and Michael had dreaded, words that shattered what little hope remained. "I'm so sorry," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing more we can do. Ethan's heart is too weak. It's only a matter of time now." The room had become a prison of despair since that moment, filled with silent cries and helpless prayers. Yet Charlie seemed unwilling to surrender. He had been pacing restlessly, his ears flicking up at unseen sounds, his eyes darting toward the window as though sensing something beyond human perception. Then, suddenly, he froze. Charlie's ears perked, his body stiffening as he turned towards the window. The full moon outside cast an eerie glow through the glass, illuminating the room in silver light. His deep brown eyes locked onto the moonlight, as though he could see something no one else could. A strange stillness settled over the air, the atmosphere shifting into something otherworldly. Sarah, noticing the dog's restlessness, clutched Michael's hand. "Michael, Charlie's acting strange." Before Michael could respond, the heart monitor blared an alarm, the erratic beeping piercing through the heavy silence. "Doctor!" Sarah screamed, her voice raw with panic. "Please, come quickly!" Chaos erupted as nurses and doctors rushed into the room. Dr. Coleman checked Ethan's vitals, his expression a mixture of urgency and resignation. The numbers on the monitors fluctuated wildly, signaling a critical change. Amidst the turmoil, Charlie did the unthinkable. He leaped onto the bed, pressing his warm, furry body against Ethan's frail frame. "Get that dog out of here," Dr. Coleman barked, his professionalism cracking under the weight of the crisis. "No, please," Sarah pleaded, her hands trembling as she reached for the doctor. "Let him stay. We've tried everything else." Dr. Coleman hesitated. The logic-driven part of him wanted to protest, but something in Sarah's desperation, in the dog's unwavering determination, made him step back. "Fine," he conceded, "but if anything happens—" He didn't finish his sentence. Charlie lay beside Ethan, his deep breaths matching the boy's shallow ones. Slowly, the room quieted, the heart monitor's erratic beeps becoming steadier, more rhythmic. The impossible was happening. A hush fell over the room as Ethan's small fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered before slowly opening, revealing tired but conscious eyes. A weak, whisper-soft voice escaped his lips. "Charlie, you didn't leave me." For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. She cupped her son's face in her hands, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Ethan," she sobbed, "you're here. You came back to us." Michael, too overwhelmed to speak, clutched his son's hand, his grip firm yet tender. Dr. Coleman stood frozen, his medical mind struggling to process what had just transpired. The machines continued to confirm the impossible. Ethan was stabilizing, but, as the miracle unfolded, something changed in Charlie. The dog, who had been so full of restless energy just moments ago, suddenly seemed drained. He climbed down from Ethan's bed and curled up on the cold hospital floor. His breaths were slow, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He had given everything, as if he had transferred his strength, his very essence, into the boy he loved most. Sarah noticed immediately. She knelt beside Charlie, running a gentle hand through his fur. "You saved him, Charlie. You're our angel." Despite the joy in the room, an undercurrent of uncertainty remained. Dr. Coleman, ever the scientist, ordered immediate tests. Nurses moved swiftly, adjusting monitors and preparing for further examinations. Sarah and Michael were asked to step outside, but they refused to leave. Their instincts told them Ethan needed them more than ever. And Charlie needed them too. As the night stretched on, Michael recalled something he had once read about the bond between humans and animals. How some dogs had an almost supernatural connection with their owners. How they could sense emotions, danger, even death itself. But this was beyond comprehension. The question that lingered in the air was one no one dared ask aloud. How far can a dog's love go to save the one they love most? Ethan was alive. And somewhere in the depths of his golden retriever's weary eyes, a quiet knowing rested. Charlie had known all along that love, in its purest form, was the most powerful force of all. As Sarah gently laid a blanket over Charlie, whispering her gratitude, the dog let out a soft, content sigh. He had done his job, and for now, that was enough. Years ago, Michael had read something about animals having an unexplained connection to humans, something beyond science, something deeply spiritual. Now, as he looked at Sarah, hesitant yet curious, he finally voiced his thoughts. "Have you ever heard of cases where animals heal people?" "I know it's not scientific, but..." Sarah shook her head, her fingers still gently wrapped around Ethan's fragile hand. "Michael, I don't know what happened, but I'm starting to believe Charlie did something none of us understand." At that moment, Ethan closed his eyes, not out of exhaustion, but in a peaceful rest he hadn't known in weeks. The beeping of the monitors remained steady, and yet a profound mystery lingered in the air. Was it Charlie's unwavering love that had saved Ethan? Or was there something deeper, something inexplicable binding them together? The hours that followed were filled with silent awe and unanswered questions. Ethan was alive, stable. But why? The medical team, seasoned professionals who had seen countless miracles and tragedies, found themselves grappling with an event that defied reason. Dr. Coleman, a man of unwavering faith in science, spent hours reviewing test results. There was no medical explanation for Ethan's sudden recovery. No shift in medication, no change in treatment. And yet, against all odds, the boy had come back from the brink of death. Meanwhile, Charlie remained at Ethan's side, though his once vibrant energy seemed to drain with every passing moment. He lay still, his chest rising and falling in deep, labored breaths. Something about his behavior was unsettling. It was as if he had given a part of himself to save the boy. Michael observed the dog closely, a memory from childhood surfacing in his mind. His grandfather, a man deeply rooted in old beliefs, had once told him a story about dogs possessing an ability to share their life force with those they loved in times of dire need. A legend, nothing more. But looking at Charlie, lying weak, yet unwavering beside Ethan, Michael couldn't shake the eerie connection between the tale and reality. Hesitantly, he voiced his thoughts to Sarah. "Doesn't Charlie seem different to you? He's not just tired. It's something deeper." Sarah, her fingers still running through Ethan's hair, glanced down at Charlie. "He is different, yes, but I can't help but feel like he and Ethan are connected in a way I don't understand." As they whispered to each other, Ethan's eyes fluttered open again. This time, he looked stronger, more alert, a faint smile playing on his lips as he gazed at Charlie. "He was with me the whole time, Mum," Ethan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a weight that made Sarah and Michael exchange astonished glances. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, leaning closer. When it was dark, When I felt like I was slipping away, he was there. I could hear Charlie. He didn't let me go. His words sent a ripple through the room, heavy with emotion and an unspoken truth that neither parent dared to fully comprehend. Michael swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. How could a dog be there, wherever Ethan had been? His gaze drifted to Charlie, who now lay in a deep slumber beside the bed, his ears still slightly perked as if, even in his rest, he remained vigilant. As the hospital quieted in the dead of night and the frantic pace of nurses slowed, Sarah stayed beside Ethan while Michael stepped out for a moment. It was then that Ethan spoke again, his words making her blood run cold. "Mum, when I was in that dark place, I heard a voice. It wasn't just Charlie. It was someone else. It felt like they were calling me, telling me I had to stay. Like it was important that I didn't leave." Sarah's breath hitched, a chill ran down her spine. "Who, Ethan?" she whispered, her voice barely steady. "I don't know," Ethan said softly, "but it felt familiar. Like someone who loved me, someone who didn't want me to go." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. She held her son's hand tighter, pressing a gentle kiss against his forehead. "You're here now, sweetheart. That's all that matters." But deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened, something beyond their understanding. Michael returned a few minutes later, his coffee untouched in his hands. One glance at Sarah's face told him everything. Something had changed. Something they couldn't quite explain. And then there was Charlie. As the night stretched on, the golden retriever stirred only once, lifting his head slightly to look at Ethan before sighing deeply and resting again. A quiet understanding passed between them. Whatever had happened, wherever Ethan had been, Charlie had brought him back. And in doing so, he had given a piece of himself. The days that followed were a blur of medical evaluations and whispered conversations. Ethan continued to regain his strength, and while doctors remained baffled, his parents no longer cared for an explanation. All that mattered was that their son was alive. Charlie, however, remained different. He wasn't sick, but he wasn't the same. He moved slower, rested more, his once bright eyes carrying a quiet wisdom. He had done something no one could comprehend, and somehow he understood it better than any of them. One evening, as Ethan sat up in bed, running his fingers through Charlie's fur, he spoke again. "Mum, Dad, I think Charlie gave me something." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Ethan hesitated, then said, "I don't know. But I feel him. Inside me. Like a part of him is always with me now." Sarah choked back a sob, pulling Ethan into her arms. Michael placed a hand on Charlie's head, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved him, boy. You saved our son." And in Charlie's tired but content gaze, they saw the answer they had been searching for all along. Love, in its purest form, had the power to defy even the most impossible odds. And sometimes, just sometimes, a bond was strong enough to bring someone back from the edge of forever. Sarah couldn't shake the eerie yet comforting thought that something beyond human understanding had worked through Charlie to bring Ethan back. As she held her son's hand, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, a single question echoed in her mind. What else did Charlie know that they didn't? The following morning, an unusual calm blanketed the hospital room. Ethan remained fast asleep, but his breathing was steady and peaceful, a sight Sarah had longed to see for weeks. Michael sat quietly in the chair beside him, his gaze fixed on Charlie. The dog hadn't moved much, his head resting heavily on the floor, as if his entire existence was now focused on being near Ethan. Sarah whispered, "Michael, have you noticed how he hasn't left Ethan's side for even a second? He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday." Michael nodded, but another concern gnawed at him. When he finally gathered the courage, he moved closer to Charlie and gently ran his hand through the dog's golden fur. Charlie didn't react at first. Then he lifted his tired eyes and let out a deep, almost sorrowful sigh. There was something in those eyes, something indescribable, a mix of exhaustion and understanding beyond human comprehension. Maybe he knows more than we realize, Michael murmured, almost to himself. Just then, Ethan stirred in bed. His eyelids fluttered open, and the moment he saw Charlie on the floor, he instinctively reached out. Sarah rushed to help him sit up, but Ethan's determination was clear. "I need him, Mum," he said, his voice still weak, but carrying an unexpected firmness. "He's the reason I'm here." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Before she could respond, Dr. Coleman entered the room, a clipboard in hand, his expression wavering between relief and bafflement. "Ethan's tests are normal," he announced, shaking his head slightly. "But this doesn't make sense. There was no indication he could recover this quickly. I don't know how to explain it." He hesitated before looking at Michael and Sarah. "Did you notice anything unusual? Any changes that might have caused this?" Michael and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. How could they explain what had happened without sounding irrational? Who would believe that the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog had played a part in something so miraculous? Sarah exhaled slowly before answering. "All we know is that Charlie hasn't left his side. Maybe that helped." Dr. Coleman looked at Charlie, his usual skepticism faltering for just a moment. He knew science demanded logic, yet the intensity in the dog's gaze made him reconsider the impossible. "Well," the doctor finally said, "we'll continue monitoring Ethan, but I have to say, this case is unique." When Dr. Coleman left, Michael walked to the window, his thoughts swirling. Something extraordinary was happening, something that defied all logic. As he turned back to Charlie, now appearing even more exhausted, a wave of guilt washed over him. The dog was carrying a burden no one could understand. One thing was certain: Charlie was playing a role beyond explanation. What motivated him? What did he know? And most unsettling of all, how far was he willing to go for Ethan? Charlie remained at Ethan's side, his once bright eyes now dull, his strength visibly fading with every passing hour. Sarah's heart tightened as she observed him. He wasn't just tired, he was losing something vital, yet his unwavering determination to protect Ethan never wavered. Michael started noticing small but disturbing changes. Charlie no longer reacted to sounds. He didn't lift his head when called. It was as if his very essence was being drained. Meanwhile, Ethan's improvement was undeniable, a paradox no one could explain. That afternoon, Ethan asked to sit at the edge of his bed. His voice, once frail, was now stronger. "Mum, I need Charlie to stay with me," he said, gently holding the dog's leash. Even if he's tired, Sarah tried to mask the worry in her expression. But Charlie's fragility was painfully obvious. Still, how could she deny her son when, against all odds, he seemed to be coming back to life? Michael awoke from a restless sleep, his mind still, tangled in the lingering shadows of a nightmare. Something about it unsettled him, gnawed at the edges of his thoughts like an unspoken warning. He could feel it in his bones. Something beyond human understanding was unfolding before them. The hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beep of the monitors and the soft breathing of his son. Unable to shake the unease, Michael quietly rose from his chair and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The cool night air met him as he approached the large window at the end of the corridor. He stared out at the vast sky, where the stars shimmered against the darkness, their light unwavering yet distant, and yet there was something about them tonight, something eerie, something expectant. "How can this be happening?" he murmured, pressing a hand to the glass. "Why does it feel like Charlie is giving something of himself to Ethan?" His heart ached at the thought. He had seen the undeniable shift, the way Ethan's body regained its strength, while Charlie's seemed to wither. The connection between them was no longer just companionship. It was something deeper, something unseen. When Michael returned to the room, he found Sarah still at Ethan's bedside, gently stroking their son's hand. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his face serene in a way they hadn't seen in months. Charlie, as always, lay on the floor beside the bed, his golden fur barely rising and falling with each breath. His eyes, tired but resolute, remained fixed on Ethan, as if he were standing guard over something fragile and sacred. Michael knelt beside the dog, running his fingers through Charlie's fur. He could feel the warmth of life still within him, but there was something else too. An exhaustion, so profound it felt almost otherworldly. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Michael whispered, "You're doing something none of us understand, aren't you? But at what cost?" Morning arrived with a quiet stillness that felt unnatural. Dr. Coleman entered the room, holding a fresh set of test results. His face bore a look of astonishment, his usual professional composure shaken. "There's no way to explain this," the doctor said, flipping through the papers in his hands. "Ethan is not only stable but showing signs of a full recovery. If this continues, he might be discharged in just a few days." He looked up, his gaze filled with both joy and confusion. "But I have to ask, was there some intervention we don't know about?" Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance. How could they possibly explain that Ethan's beating heart, his miraculous return, was not just his own? That the silent warrior, at his bedside, the dog who refused to leave his side, seemed to be offering something unseen, something vital. No one would believe them. No one could understand that with every breath Ethan took, Charlie seemed to lose a piece of himself. Unable to bear the weight of the realization, Michael stepped out into the hallway again, his vision blurred with unshed tears. He clenched his fists, trying to reconcile the impossible truth. Something was happening, something no one could stop. That night, the hospital was silent. Ethan slept soundly, his breathing steady and strong, while beside him, Charlie seemed even more fragile. The golden retriever's body barely moved, his strength slipping away like sand through fingers. Sarah sat beside the bed, watching him with a tightness in her chest she couldn't ignore. She knew what was happening, even if she refused to say it aloud. Michael stood by the window once more, bathed in the silver glow of the full moon. His heart felt heavy with gratitude and guilt. He had never believed in miracles before, but now, faced with one, he found himself afraid. A soft rustling behind him made him turn. Ethan was awake, his weary eyes locked onto Charlie. His voice, though weak, carried an unshakable truth. "Mum. Dad." "He's tired," Ethan said, his small hand gripping the dog's leash as if trying to keep him tethered to this world. "I know he helped me. He saved me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she reached down, stroking Charlie's head with infinite tenderness. "You're our hero, Charlie," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But now we need to take care of you." Michael forced himself to speak, his voice rough with emotion. "Ethan, we'll do everything we can for him. He'll be fine. Just like you." Ethan, however, only shook his head slowly. "He protected me when I was in that dark place. Now he needs to rest." Feeling suffocated, Michael stepped outside, seeking fresh air in the hospital's garden. The cold night wrapped around him, yet he felt a warmth beside him. Turning his head, he saw Charlie. Despite his exhaustion, the dog had followed him, his legs trembling with effort. Michael knelt down, his hands cradling the dog's face. Charlie's eyes, though dim, were filled with something deeper than loyalty, an understanding beyond words. "You're telling me something, aren't you?" Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "But why does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" Charlie licked his hand gently before laying down on the cool grass. Even in his weakness, his expression was peaceful, as if he had fulfilled his purpose. Back in the hospital room, Sarah noticed Michael's downcast look when he returned, her heart clenched with fear. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael swallowed hard. "He's showing us that all of this has a purpose," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "But I think we need to prepare for what's coming next." Morning broke softly over room 304, but the tension remained, thick and unspoken. Ethan was awake, his gaze fixed on Charlie with growing worry. The dog remained still beside the bed, his breathing shallow, his once bright eyes barely open. Sarah adjusted Ethan's pillows, but her attention never left the dog. She could feel it in her bones, the undeniable truth pressing against her heart. Charlie was fading, and no one could stop it. Michael stood near the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He paused for a moment, observing the quiet, yet profound, scene in front of him. Ethan sat upright in his hospital bed, his small hands gripping Charlie's leash as though it were a lifeline. Sarah sat beside him, her fingers gently stroking the dog's golden fur, her touch filled with unspoken gratitude. The room was heavy with a silent connection, one that transcended words, a language spoken only by hearts bound together. Michael approached the bed, handing one of the cups to Sarah. His voice was soft, hesitant. "He's still not up?" Sarah shook her head. "He won't leave Ethan's side. It's like he's forcing himself to stay here, even if it's costing him everything." Ethan looked up at his parents, his voice barely above a whisper, but resolute. "Mum, Dad, I want us to help Charlie. He helped me when no one else could. Now, it's his turn." Michael felt an ache deep in his chest at his son's words. Ethan was right. But how did you help an animal who seemed to be willingly giving up his own life out of love? As he tried to form an answer, Ethan added, "I feel like he needs us, now more than ever." Later that day, Dr. Coleman entered the room, his expression a mixture of relief and curiosity. He flipped through Ethan's chart before glancing at the boy with an approving nod. "Ethan is improving incredibly. If he continues at this rate, we might be able to discharge him in a few days." His voice held a slight edge of disbelief, as though even he couldn't comprehend the sudden change in the boy's condition. Michael, however, found it impossible to celebrate just yet. His eyes shifted to the unmoving golden figure on the floor. "And Charlie?" he asked, pointing toward the dog curled beside the hospital bed. Dr. Coleman frowned, his gaze flickering toward the dog. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "He looks exhausted. It could be stress. Animals can be very sensitive to human emotions. But other than that, I don't see anything obvious. You could take him to a vet just to be sure." As soon as the doctor left, Michael and Sarah knew they had to do something. They contacted a local veterinarian who arrived at the hospital that afternoon. A kind-looking woman named Ellen examined Charlie carefully, running her hands through his fur and checking his vitals. "He's very tired," she said gently, her hand still resting on the dog's head. "But I don't see any signs of physical illness. It's like he's emotionally drained." Michael swallowed hard. "He hasn't left Ethan's side since all of this started," he explained. "It's like he's protecting our son from something." Ellen looked at Charlie with a knowing expression, her voice thoughtful. "Dogs have an incredible bond with their humans. Sometimes they give of themselves in ways we don't fully understand. Charlie seems to be carrying a weight that only he can feel." As Ellen left, Ethan called his parents over, his expression serious. His fingers ran through Charlie's fur with gentle reverence. "I want Charlie to know how much I love him," he said, his voice full of quiet desperation. "Do you promise he'll be okay?" Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy. How could they promise something they weren't sure of? But one thing was certain. The bond between Ethan and Charlie defied logic, defied science. It was something neither of them could explain, but neither could they ignore. Night fell over the hospital, casting a tranquil hush over room 304. Ethan, now sitting comfortably in bed, never took his eyes off Charlie. The dog's energy had all but vanished. His breathing was slow, heavy, his chest rising and falling with effort. The light in his eyes, once filled with unwavering determination, was beginning to dim. Sarah sat beside Ethan, holding his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Michael, his hands stuffed into his pockets, stood by the window, watching the city, lights flicker against the night sky. "Mum, I know Charlie." Ethan started, his voice thick with emotion, but he couldn't finish the sentence. Tears welled in his eyes as he reached down, gently cupping Charlie's face in his small hands. The dog barely moved but let out a soft exhale as if acknowledging Ethan's touch. Michael turned back to them, his chest tightening as he took in the scene. The weight of unspoken words filled the room. They were running out of time. Ethan's voice was soft but filled with emotion as he looked down at his loyal companion. "Mum, I know Charlie is tired. He's still here for me, but I feel like he's trying too hard." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She knew Ethan was right, but the thought of losing Charlie was unbearable. "He's strong, my love. He's done everything for you, and somehow he's still protecting you." Michael slowly turned, watching the scene with a weight that seemed impossible to bear. He approached the bed, crouched beside Ethan, and placed his hand over his son's. "Ethan, Charlie gave everything he could to save you. Maybe it's time to let him rest for a while. He did this because he loves you, but now he needs us to take care of him." Michael's words echoed in the silence of the room. Ethan looked at his father, his eyes filled with tears. "I know, Dad, but I want him to know that I'll never forget what he did for me. Never." That night, the room was immersed in an almost supernatural calm. The rhythmic beeping of Ethan's monitor signaled his stable condition. Yet beside the bed, Charlie seemed different. His breathing was even slower, his chest barely rising and falling. When he opened his eyes for a brief moment, he looked directly at Ethan, as if transmitting a final, silent message. Michael noticed the change and knelt beside Charlie, gently stroking his head. "You did something none of us can understand, kid. You gave everything for Ethan. Thank you. Thank you for being part of our family." As the sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of orange, Ethan woke up with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. He looked around the room and realized that Charlie was still beside him, his head resting on his paws. But there was something different. His loyal friend had finally found rest. Sarah approached Ethan and wrapped him in a tight hug, her tears falling freely. Michael, with his own eyes glistening, placed his hand on their shoulders, a silent bond forming between them. They knew Charlie had passed, but his presence was still strongly felt in the room. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated room 304, they all understood that Charlie hadn't just saved Ethan. He had left behind an eternal lesson. Unconditional love has the power to transform lives and remain alive even when the body is gone. The morning light filled the room with an unusual serenity. Ethan held Charlie's leash, his gaze fixed on the window. There was an emptiness, but also a peace that no one could explain. Sarah and Michael, sitting next to their son, felt the weight of their loss, but also the strength of what Charlie had done. When Dr. Coleman entered with the latest test results, his expression was a mix of disbelief and awe. "Ethan isn't just improving. He's stronger than we expected. This doesn't make sense." He hesitated before continuing. Is there something you're not telling me?" Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "It was love. Charlie gave everything for our son." The doctor nodded, speechless, before leaving the room, unable to explain what had happened. But some things they all knew didn't need explanations. Love, devotion, and sacrifice were forces beyond science. And Charlie, their beloved friend, had proven just that. Ethan requested to take a walk in the hospital garden, and with his parents' help, He slowly made his way to a bench under a large oak tree. As he moved forward, he suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on the empty lawn ahead. "He's here," Ethan said softly. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, hesitant yet hopeful. "Charlie?" Michael asked. Ethan nodded with a peaceful smile. "He says he's okay, and that he will always take care of us." A tearful silence settled between the parents as they felt something beyond what they could explain. They could not see Charlie, but they could feel his presence, warm and unwavering, surrounding them like an embrace. Back in the hospital room, Ethan picked up a sketchbook and began to draw. As his pencil moved across the paper, Sarah watched in quiet awe. When he finished, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The drawing depicted Charlie standing beside a brilliant light, as if watching over the family, his protective spirit never wavering. "He wants us to know he's happy," Ethan said simply. The portrait was placed on the wall, a permanent reminder of Charlie's sacrifice and the boundless love he had left behind. That night, Ethan slept soundly for the first time in weeks, while Sarah and Michael sat together, hand in hand, watching over him. Breaking the silence, Michael whispered, "Charlie showed us what true love is." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And he brought us closer than ever." Even in his absence, Charlie remained a part of their family, binding them together in a way that would never fade. Days later, the long journey at the hospital came to an end. When Ethan was finally discharged, the medical team gathered to bid him farewell, still amazed by the miraculous recovery that defied explanation. Michael carried his son's backpack while Sarah held Ethan's hand, guiding him carefully to the car. Inside his pocket, Ethan clutched Charlie's collar, a talisman of love, a symbol of the bond that had saved his life. Back home, Charlie's absence was deeply felt. His bed remained untouched in the corner of the room, and his toys were still scattered about as if waiting for his return. Yet, Ethan did not seem sad. Instead, he spent the afternoon drawing, creating images of Charlie running through green fields under a bright, endless sky. "He's happy now," Ethan said with a calm smile, "and he wants us to be happy too." Watching his son, Michael felt a newfound determination stir within him. Inspired by Charlie's unwavering love, he turned to Sarah and suggested, "What if we helped other animals the way Charlie helped us? We could do it in his honor." Sarah's eyes softened, touched by the idea. "I think he would love that." From that day on, the family dedicated themselves to helping animals in need. They visited shelters, cared for abandoned dogs, and found loving homes for them. Ethan, still in recovery, took part in every effort, enthusiastically sharing Charlie's story with anyone who would listen. Each act of kindness felt like a tribute to Charlie, a way to continue his legacy. Though time passed, his memory remained alive, not just within their hearts, but in the lives of the animals they helped, each one carrying forward the love he had shown. In the end, they realized that love never truly disappears. It transforms, it grows, and it finds new ways to touch the world. Charlie's journey had not ended. It had merely taken a new form, guiding them towards something even greater. And so, his presence endured, not as a memory, but as a force of unconditional love, inspiring not just Ethan, Sarah, and Michael, but everyone whose lives were touched by his story.